The heavy, suffocating scent of ozone and ancient rot clung to the walls like a living shroud as the shadows began to stretch and writhe, elongating into claw-like shapes that seemed to hunger for the dying light of the single flickering bulb overhead, creating a landscape of shifting darkness where the very concept of safety felt like a distant, shattered dream from a life lived by someone else entirely. Every floorboard groaned under the invisible weight of secrets long buried, a rhythmic, agonizing creak that mirrored the frantic pounding of a heart trapped in a ribcage of ice, while the air grew so thick with the damp chill of the grave that every breath felt like inhaling shards of frosted glass, tearing at the lungs and leaving the taste of copper and old dust on the tongue. There was no ticking clock to mark the passage of agony, no mechanical rhythm to ground the soul in reality, only the eternal, oppressive silence of a house that had forgotten the sun, a place where the walls themselves seemed to lean inward with a predatory intent, whispering in a language of dust and decay about the horrors that had transpired within these cold, stony confines long before the first stone of the foundation was ever laid by trembling hands. "I told you never to open that door," a voice rasped from the gloom, its tone like dry leaves skittering across a tombstone in a wind that never reached the skin. The darkness didn't just hide things, it consumed them, swallowing the very concept of hope until all that remained was the primal, jagged edge of terror that sliced through the soul, leaving the mind to wander in a labyrinth of its own making, where every corner turned revealed only a deeper, more profound sense of isolation, a psychological abyss where the walls were painted with the shadows of things that should never have been birthed into the light. Somewhere in the distance, or perhaps right behind the ear, a soft, wet sound echoed, the sound of something heavy and limbless being dragged across the floor. And the realization dawned that whatever had been locked away was no longer confined by mere wood and iron, but was now prowling the corridors with a slow, deliberate hunger that defied the laws of nature and the sanity of man. The hallway seemed to stretch into infinity, a corridor of distorted geometry where the doors led only to rooms filled with the echoes of screams that had yet to be uttered, and the wallpaper peeled away like scorched skin to reveal the pulsing, blackened veins of the house itself, a structure that breathed in unison with the nightmares of its inhabitants. "Someone there. Please answer me." The plea broke the silence, trembling and fragile as a moth's wing in a gale, disappearing into the void without even an echo to offer comfort. The response was not a word, but a sudden, sharp drop in temperature that turned the exhaled breath into a ghost of white mist, a spectral sign that the boundary between the living and the dead had worn thin, frayed by the weight of 1,000 unspoken sins and the gravity of a curse that had finally found its mark. Eyes that had never seen the light, milky and swollen with ancient malice, began to peer from the cracks in the ceiling, glowing with a dull, predatory light that promised no mercy, only the cold embrace of the void where the self is lost and only the scream remains, eternal and unheard by any living ear. The floor beneath the feet felt less like wood and more like a membrane, a thin skin stretched over a gullet of darkness that waited for a single moment of weakness to collapse and swallow the intruder whole, dragging them down into a pit of forgotten names and faces that had been erased from history by the very walls that now stood as silent sentinels. "You brought this upon yourself the moment you stepped over the threshold," the whisper returned, closer now, smelling of old earth and metallic blood, the heat of its unseen breath chilling the skin more than the winter air. The floor gave way to a sensation of falling, not through space, but through layers of memory and nightmare, where the faces of the forgotten pressed against the glass of reality, their features twisted into masks of eternal grief and silent weeping rage, their fingers scratching against the underside of the world in a desperate attempt to find a way back into the light. There was no escape, no exit, no dawn to look forward to. Just the infinite expansion of the dark, a velvet trap that heightened with every frantic movement, ensuring that the only thing left of the intruder would be a legend whispered by the wind in the trees, a warning to those who dare to seek the truth behind the shadows that wait at the edge of the world. Every step taken was a step further away from the possibility of salvation, as the house repositioned its hallways like a puzzle box designed by a madman, ensuring that every turn led back to the center of the nightmare, back to the room where the door stood slightly ajar, inviting the curious to witness the end of all things. The silence was now a physical presence, a weight that pressed against the temples and filled the ears with the sound of rushing blood, until the only sound left in the universe was the steady, rhythmic thumping of a heart that was slowly running out of reasons to beat. The shadows began to coalesce into solid forms, figures draped in the tatters of centuries-old misery, their movements jerky and unnatural as they closed the distance, their eyeless sockets fixed on the flickering spark of life that remained, a spark they intended to extinguish with the cold, damp hands of the grave. "Why did you come back? We were almost at peace," a different voice moaned, this one high-pitched and whistling through a throat that felt as though it were filled with sand. The walls began to bleed a dark, viscous fluid that pooled at the feet, a liquid that didn't flow so much as it reached, tendrils of blackness curling around the ankles like shackles of liquid shadow, pulling the body toward the floor as the ceiling began to descend, the two planes of existence threatening to meet and crush everything in between into a fine, forgotten powder. In the center of the room, a mirror that had been clouded for a century suddenly cleared, revealing not a reflection of the person standing before it, but a vision of a skeletal figure wearing the same clothes, standing in the same spot, its jaw hanging open in a silent, eternal howl of realization. This was the trap, the cycle of the house that fed on the lost and the lonely, turning every seeker into a permanent resident of its halls, a living memory etched into the woodwork to be stared at by the next victim who wandered in from the cold. The air finally vanished, replaced by the vacuum of the void, and as the last light flickered out, the house settled into a satisfied stillness, its hunger momentarily sated as it waited for the next soul to hear the whisper of its name in the dark.